Hello, everybody. I've got a special treat in store tonight. We have the doctor in the house. Dr. Dennis Harness is here to talk to us about the outer planets in Vedic astrology and how they can be applied. And I'd also really love to hear how you have worked with the outer planets too. It'd be really
Yeah.
wonderful to hear if you want to share some of your insights along those lines with us.
Oh, that'd be great, Michael. It's great to see you again.
Oh, it's good talking to you. I think last time was January, December, January.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, with the outer planets, I was, originally started out as a tropical Western astrologer and still utilize that system as a backdrop to my work because I feel like it's a valid system for sure. And to be honest, I was always given a little bit of a hard time from traditional Vedic astrologers for using the outer planets, which I can understand. As one of my teachers, Chakrapani Law, said, well, just be careful, you could create goulash. So
Right.
I use them with a little bit of trepidation, but I find particularly if these outer planets are conjunct a planet in your chart, of course, they can really reflect that signature of the outer planet. Or if the planets are angular in the chart, so let's just say the first house, the seventh, the 10th, or the fourth house, they can be very strong in terms of their energy, or if they're making hard aspects, again, to personal planets, squares, oppositions, things like that.
Definitely, definitely.
So I kept using them and I would plug them into the Vedic chart, even though I didn't emphasize them strongly because I was trying to, go with the tradition and learn the tradition and all that. But I always felt a certain sense of shame around it. Actually, one Vedic astrologer, which will remain unnamed, he called me up one time and was talking to me, and he was talking about my use of the outer planets, and he actually said, "Shame on you, shame on you."
Oh,
And
goodness.
later apologized, but this is it used to be, this was 20 years ago, a very contentious energy, and now issue. But now it's kind of mellowed a bit over age.
I'm finding a lot of people are beginning to bring it in to Vedic interpretations. At least I hear talk about it a lot.
And when I was born, it's hard for me to ignore it. I have Pluto right on my ascendant.
Well, there you go. Yes. So you have that Pluto. It's almost like you are Pluto when you have something like that.
Yeah, and then I live in Sedona, which is right next to the Lowell Observatory where they discovered Pluto in 1930s. So you can run, but you can't hide.
Exactly.
I find.
Definitely.
So we'll talk, about Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. I'll kind of save Pluto for last, but I thought I would mention another thing that happened back in 1994. I was back at a conference on the East Coast in Washington, D.C., put out by Richard Houck,
Mm-hmm.
who actually wrote a book, on Pluto, or it was actually called The Astrology of Death. So actually it could include Yama as well as Pluto,
Right.
the Lord of Death. Anyway, long story short, I was there at this conference, and I met a Vedic astrologer from India named Narendra Desai. And Narendra was in New Jersey that time and had been over for several years from India. And he talked about in his lecture the use of the outer planets. And of course, this was a very healing experience for me. I didn't feel alone. I felt a sense of kinship with Narendra. And he mentioned that in a museum in Madras or Chennai, India, there was a Vashishta palm leaf that was in the museum. Mm-hmm. And on this palm leaf was written, how did he put it, that there would be 3 important grahas or planets discovered during Kali Yuga. And according to Narendra, on this palm leaf, it went on to reveal that the planets would be Prajapati, which I associate with Uranus, Varuna, which I associate with Neptune, and Yama with Pluto. And he went on to say that these planets, again, were discovered by this great sage Vashishta, who was actually written about, he was an author actually of many hymns in the Rig Veda, which is conservatively dated like 1500 BC,
Right, right.
probably much older than that. And he was considered a great priest of the kings. So I found this to be really interesting and kind of supportive of my continued use of these outer planets. He often used them in the chart, kind of what I'm describing, but he particularly actually liked to use them in relationship compatibility work and synastry. And he found quite often, they tend to be a little bit more problematic type planets, even though I feel the outer planets have their greatness and have their brilliance.
Oh,
and
definitely.
bring their truth and their, how would we say, they can bring us great insights and really help us navigate. So the idea was this palm leaf was found, and again, was in the museum in Chennai. I actually went to Chennai in search of this palm leaf.
Oh, wow.
But to be honest, I couldn't find it. I talked to the curators of the museum and things like that, but I could never locate it. Although they showed me these ancient palm leaves, which are, look like they're hundreds of years old, and they're amazing kind of predictive technique that's used in India.
Right.
So Uranus connected with Prajapati, if we think of Uranus as kind of connected with he's the father of Venus. So there's a connection with creativity associated with Uranus. And Richard Tarnas wrote a great book on Prometheus the Awakener. And he associated the planet Uranus with Prometheus.
I've never read that book. I read his other. What's his other big book? I can't remember the name of it.
What was it? Something of the Passion of the Western Mind, or something like that.
It was something like that. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt. You just.
Oh, no worries. Yeah. No worries. He's brilliant. He's a brilliant astrologer and brilliant writer. But anyway, that book had a strong effect on me because, to me, it represented also the rebel and the anarchist that can come with Uranus.
Right.
And again, I actually, Donald Trump in his chart, just to bring him in, because he seems to be everywhere. Probably, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on his chart, just to say, though, that when he was born, he had Uranus conjunct the sun in the chart, actually along with Rahu, the north node,
right.
which we're talking about in a few minutes, because I associate Rahu, the north node of the moon, with Uranus also, because it's very changeable, very unpredictable kind of energy that we've seen again time and time again with Mr. Trump. And Uranus can bring radical change. It can bring mania, anxiety. Can also bring innovation and discovery, creative intellect. A good example of a strong person with a Uranus-Sun conjunction, another person, was Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis. So again, we see this strong energy that can come in. And Freud, again, had his brilliance. Actually, his first book that was written was called The Interpretation of Dreams, which is very Neptunian kind of energy.
Yeah, right.
But anyway, he had strong Uranus in the chart. Uranus is also associated with heat, lightning, and thunder. And it's a higher octave of Mercury. So we find that, again, Uranus, if it's strong in the chart, it can bring about somebody that wants to bring radical change. I just had a client yesterday who has Uranus conjunct in the first house, conjunct his ascendant. And he is a psychiatrist that's working in the field of plant medicine, like ayahuasca, which some of these medications for the treatment of mental disorders. And he really feels strongly, I think ketamine also is used as a drug. So he's on the cutting edge of this kind of Promethean energy of bringing fire to earth in terms of trying to bring in a new type of psychiatry above and beyond just prescription drugs. And they use a number of techniques. It's kind of a holistic kind of program.
Right.
So the association, also I should mention Carl Jung had Uranus square his moon. And he was very much into bringing in the collective unconscious and the anima, the inner feminine. And it's interesting that Jung's Uranus was a square Freud's sun. So he brought some
Right.
challenge to Freud. Freud's sun was right on Jung's moon, which could indicate, him being the father of Jung, and Jung having to rebel against the father.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what I was getting when you said that.
Yeah. So just to bring in the correlation with Prajapati, Prajapati, the father of the Prajapatis, there were actually 10 of them, was Lord Brahma. And I think you were talking about, you had found in your, something about the association also with Brahma and Uranus. Can you comment on that? I'm really curious about that.
I had heard, actually Ernst Wilhelm had spoken once about the outer planets and using the outer planets, and had attributed them to Brahma for Uranus, and Vishnu for Neptune, and Shiva for Pluto.
Interesting.
With this, with the whole system of, and this is kind of a way that I've tied it in, but I've also done a lot of work with the outer planets and the nakshatras up until a couple of years ago, when I began to kind of feel like I didn't, just for my own personal reasons, I began to feel like I didn't really need to, because I was actually finding, much like what you were saying with Rahu, I've actually been finding that the nodes can kind of morph into roles that the outer planets tend to take on. I'm trying to find the right words for it. So in other words, like you're saying with Rahu, how Rahu can sometimes behave like Uranus, I find Rahu can also sometimes behave like Neptune, and even in some instances, Rahu can behave like Pluto, because Rahu will have that tendency to put things in your face that you don't want to look at, and pull all that garbage out and make you face the truth in a sometimes a very no holds barred type way that you don't really want to go into. And also sometimes Rahu can take you on this journey where things will appear one way, only to kind of flip the tables on you and make them appear a different way. And that's kind of Rahu acting both like Neptune and Uranus at the same time.
Interesting.
But it's interesting. I was going to say, but it's interesting because the system that Ernst was talking about, basically, what he's saying is because the outer planets tend to, since they are not really visible to the naked eye, really, but the nodes are also not really concrete planets, but they have a physical manifestation through eclipses. He was using the nodes as a bridge to understand the outer planets. So in other words, what he was working with was that if you have an outer planet transit to another point in the chart, it will tend to play itself out through the nodal axis.
Right. No, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
No, I associate, and I was going to talk about it later, but I'll just bring it in now since we can kind of weave things in more to this conversation. I always associate, like you do, I associate, as I mentioned, with Mr. Trump's chart. I don't like to call him President Trump. I'm sorry. Donald's chart, he has that Uranus, Rahu conjunct the sun. So it's kind of a double whammy there of that kind of rebellious energy.
Yeah, he's just made to come in and turn tables upside down, not in the most pleasant ways. In other words, it's not like a Jesus in the temple type attitude. It's more.
Yeah, there's something about propriety protocol that maybe is hard for him to do with that conjunction. Right. So I have empathy for him, I guess, on that level. But I associate, like you do, I associate Rahu sometimes with Pluto as well.
Definitely.
The one difference a little bit that I use is that I associate Ketu, the south node of the moon, with Neptune. Because of it being kind of mystical, kind of otherworldly, very Neptunian in its nature. And it's got, it's a fish with no head. So it needs that kind of guidance because it can take us and create, like you said, illusion, delusions, things like that.
Yeah.
And so what happened to me is a next thing that happened, which was kind of synchronistic for me. A few years later, after I met Narendra Desai,
Mm-hmm.
I was at a conference, the Baba conference, actually in London. And you may know of this temple. It's a temple for Murugan or Kartikeya or Mangala, a Mars temple that's in London.
I actually don't live in London, so I don't
Oh,
really
I'm
know
sorry.
about it. It's okay.
I was
It's
thinking,
okay, but I'd love to hear about it at the same time.
yeah, I'm sorry.
That's
I was
all right.
thinking you're closer to London. So,
No, I always just tell people I always just use London in terms of the time zone, because if I were to say, like, somewhere in the southwest of England, people wouldn't know what I was talking about. So
yeah, you're in the Holy Grail country.
exactly.
So anyway, this temple, I went into it, and they had a Navagraha shrine, which
Mm-hmm.
Nava means nine, and Graha is the planets. So it's a shrine for the 9 planets. And I'm giving a lecture, Michael, on the outer planets at this Baba conference. And I'm kind of shaking a little bit in my boots, to be honest with you, because I'm going, oh my God, I'm going to get rotten tomatoes thrown at me or something. So we go to this temple about a day or so before the conference, a couple of days before my lecture. And in this Navagraha shrine, there was in Sanskrit, which the priest pointed out to me, was written Ketu. And then under that was Neptune, was written on a little card placed underneath this Navagraha for Ketu.
Right.
Then in the back, and I actually have a picture of it, I should have probably sent it to you, but in the back, just to make sure I didn't just hallucinate this and have a Neptune experience, right, I actually took a couple of pictures of this shrine. On the back of the shrine, in Sanskrit, again, it said Uranus, and in Sanskrit, it said Rahu, and then underneath that, it said Uranus.
Right.
And it really just blew me away because, again, here I am experiencing this synchronicity of giving this lecture in London and going to this Mars temple, which is my Yoga Karaka planet, my planet of power being Leo rising,
right,
and getting this download from the priest. So later, when we came back with the group, the placards had been removed of Neptune and Uranus because someone complained, that this wasn't traditional, Jyotish. So it kind of, in a way, it kind of desecrated the shrine. So I thought that was interesting that would happen. So again, to me, it was kind of some confluence, some synchronicity, some confirmation
definitely
of the use of the outer planets. So,
I just had a thought while you were speaking, about Rahu, and how on one level Rahu really makes us go in and explore those vulnerabilities that we're not even really aware that we have. Well, I kind of have to backtrack here, because you can't talk about Rahu without talking about Ketu, because they're so intensively connected to each other. Ketu is simultaneously, it's about our liberation, but it also represents on many levels how we suppress ourselves from our liberation, and how we build up these ways of thinking and ways of looking at things and ways of responding to situations that don't really serve our evolution. And we think that those ways of relating to the world make us safe, and so we tend to stick with it until we recognize that it's too limited, it's too small.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the whole Meena association, with Ketu. It's like, things continually become smaller and smaller because we're, needing to become bigger and bigger in order to break away from the suppression. And so Rahu helps us to confront where we're vulnerable in association with Ketu. And so Rahu takes us into those vulnerabilities, which is the Pluto side of Pluto side of Rahu. But at the same time, it does that so that things can be shaken up and something new can be created, which is very much the Uranus side of it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at, the Brahma or the Prajapati connection to Uranus, and the Yama or the Shiva association with Pluto, you have the beginning and the end. And those two things very much, they need each other.
Yeah.
Very deeply, they need each other. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's why there's this, this kind of kinship between these outer planets, in like you said, in a strange way.
Definitely, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing I just wanted to mention about Prajapati, Prajapati was a god of creation. Also, he exerts his heat and duplicates himself into these 10 Prajapatis. And so again, we have this heat of Uranus. And his divine voice, they said, sound like thunder, which I always associate Uranus with thunder and lightning. And then finally, in some texts, they associate Prajapati, besides Brahma, they associate Prajapati with Indra, who is the lord of thunder.
That's interesting. I was thinking about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, we have all these motifs of Prajapati, Brahma, and Uranus. I remember Robert Hand once told me, of course, you know this from Western astrology, that Uranus is associated with astrology also. So sometimes with a prominent Uranus in the chart, it can indicate an astrologer, particularly one that maybe has a YouTube channel, because Uranus is connected with social media and computers. So there's that kind of connection strongly with astrology. According to Robert Hand, he found sometimes, this is just a little tidbit he told me, sometimes when Uranus is on the cusp of the 11th, 12th house, it can be a signature for an astrologer. He didn't explain why to me, but he just said he found this with prominent astrologers, Uranus on the cusp of the 11th, 12th house. According to the Vedic legend, Lord Vishnu actually revealed Jyotisha Shastra to Lord Brahma, and who in turn revealed it to the ancient Maharishis, Parashara, Garga, Jaimini. So again, we have this connection with astrology and with Uranus. And
well, you just gave me a download just then. So Vishnu obviously being the preservative aspect of God, that permeates all things, the essence that underlies all things. So it's the essence of God that's within the world, preserving the world, being responsible for that. And so Vishnu on that level is relating to a science that helps to understand the material structure of the world and how it all ties in. And so then he hands that back to Prajapati to create it and hand it back to.
Yeah. So there's a tremendous positive creative energy with Uranus, Prajapati, Brahma, all these kind of connections that we can make. And you were mentioning use of the nakshatras. To be honest with you, I haven't researched that a lot, although I'll just say that right now Uranus is in the nakshatra, pretty much in the middle of the nakshatra Ashwini, the first nakshatra, which is connected with health and healing. So I was thinking maybe during this time of Uranus's sojourn through Ashwini, there may be some real breakthroughs in terms of, on a positive note, in terms of medicine and healing, things like that. And even like I mentioned, my friend, the psychiatrist, doing this really incredible, groundbreaking work. That's not just him, that's going on around the United States and probably around the world, using medicinal herbs and other methods to, again, to be an alternative to pharmaceutical drugs. So we see this kind of strong Ashwini energy associated with Uranus right now as we speak. And in Western astrology, Uranus is in early Taurus. So, but I'm kind of like you. I looked at it a little bit, and I just found that I tend to lean back in terms of my Vedic system, to Rahu and Ketu.
Yeah.
They're really, to me, more my foundation sometimes for looking at the outer planets. But again, like I said, I like to plug them in. I like to see where they're at transiting as well as natally.
Well, I wanted to say, especially, if somebody is going through, I would say a big one for me, and not everybody goes through this, and this is the whole thing too, because, Pluto's transit around the zodiac is like every 280 years. So Not everybody is born with a chart that they go through this, but Pluto transits of the ascendant or Pluto transits of the moon or Pluto transits of the sun are very life-changing experiences.
Yeah, I mean,
Exceptionally so.
yeah, I had Pluto. It's basically in my 12th house, but it's conjunct the ascendant, as I mentioned. And I won't go into the details, but I had a near-death experience in the womb. And I always
Wow.
associate the 12th house with the womb.
Right.
And then you can even bring in midpoints. But again, my midpoint of Mars and Pluto, because I have Mars a few degrees on the other side of the ascendant, is the ascendant. So according to Ebertin, who's written on these midpoints, you should be dead by now. And when I was about a year old, I went through a windshield of a car and had my whole skull crushed, and they had to elevate the skull off my brain, and that's why I'm still a little dyslexic and a little dazed and confused about, oops, wrong planet, as I like to say. But anyway, seriously, it sometimes I find with Pluto close to the ascendant, Pluto in the 12th house, I ask clients if there was some kind of maybe difficulty going on in the family system when you're in the womb, or difficulty around the pregnancy, difficulty around the birth. And I find this quite often to be true with Pluto close to the ascendant. And again, transit-wise, again, it could be amazing time for personal transformation. But I always think of Pluto as a little bit the bulldozer planet.
Definitely. Well, Pluto's going to take you and shake you until you get what Pluto's message is. And if you understanding the myth of Pluto and Persephone really helps you to understand Pluto, which is, basically Pluto took Persephone to the underworld. And when Persephone was there, I've heard a couple of different versions of the story. One being that, Pluto basically kidnapped her and took her there. Another story being that she went there willingly with him. And I kind of tend to subscribe more to the latter story. And she ended up eating, the pomegranate when she was down there, and he had his back turned, didn't know she was doing that, and turned around and said, "Oh no, since you ate that pomegranate, you can't leave." And so a deal was brokered between Demeter, the goddess of agriculture, who was Persephone's mother, and Pluto, so that basically they could honor the need for her to still be in the underworld, but also for her to come back above the earth. And so basically 6 months out of the year, she spends down in the underworld, and 6 months out of the year, she comes up above the ground, and that's the harvest season when we have abundance. And so Pluto takes you into these deep, dark places, but it takes you there so that you can reclaim your power. And so when you face the truth that Pluto's wanting you to face, Pluto tends to reward you with that strength and that power and that renewed sense of, vigor and understanding after the challenge that it puts you through. But it's not like you want to have it all the time.
Interesting. I just posted on Facebook some art of Frida Kahlo, the famous Mexican artist.
I saw that. Yeah.
And she happens to have a tight conjunction of Venus and Pluto.
I didn't know that. It's interesting.
Really reflects the Persephone myth. And I really advocate to my clients that second version as well, rather than the victim. Of course, there are victims that happen, victimization, so I don't mean to downplay that, but sometimes it's a little more empowering to think of her making a choice to go down in the underworld to do this deep diving, inner work. And if you look at Frida Kahlo's paintings, you'll see quite often the lot of death and a lot of pain and suffering in those paintings. And she had a very tumultuous relationship, of course, with Diego Rivera, the famous muralist, painter, and artist from Mexico as well, Mexico City. So hers is one of those charts that really reflects to me the Promethean, or the Persephone myth very strongly. So, and she died fairly young, but again, her art was amazingly transformative, and very much she had, the bus accident, which was, of course, a near-death experience for her, that type of thing.
So I was going to say another important thing that I think that the outer planets can be very helpful for is something that happens in everybody's life about the age of 42.
Mm-hmm.
which is Neptune square and Uranus opposition.
Good point.
Whenever I see somebody is like, around the age of 42, that immediately pops into my head, because it's a very life-changing event. If you have done a lot of self-work before that period of time, Uranus opposition is not that difficult, I find. And same with Neptune square. If you haven't, then that's when people tend to decide that they're going to go out and buy a sports car and try to relive their childhood, what we call midlife crisis.
Yeah.
But really, it's kind of indicated through, in terms of the outer planets, through Neptune square and Uranus opposition. And it's a really powerful period of time. So I would say those are the times that I kind of go, oh, I want to take a look at that. Yeah. Other than that, I tend to I find the same thing through through Rahu and Ketu. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. It's interesting too. As you mentioned, the outer planets, especially Pluto, particularly Hades is his Greek name, mm-hmm. and he was one of the definitions of Hades, interestingly, is the invisible. And so I was thinking of Rahu, of course, being a Chaya Graha, shadow planet, being invisible.
Yeah, definitely.
So there's that correlation again with Pluto and the nodes in terms of that invisibility. And of course, Pluto's now been a victim of downsizing, so to what a dwarf planet now, right? Pluto probably enjoys that, though. He likes to be a little bit more hidden so that he can do his work.
Well, I found that after that happened, he started making his presence very well known in that capacity.
Exactly. Yeah. And just mentioned Pluto right now is at around 25 degrees of Sagittarius. Mm-hmm. So again, if any of you out there have planets at around 6, I think it's around 8 degrees of Aries for Uranus, or if you have planets or a rising sign or other angular situations in your chart, placements in your chart, and Pluto's there, you may experience this energy more fully, of course. Because again, Pluto, as I mentioned, is called the bulldozer planet. And it's interesting, Lord Yama, which is the god of death, which I associate with Pluto, and also I can see the case for Shiva as well. Lord Yama, as well as Shiva, ride a bull. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting because I always think of Pluto as being the bulldozer, and so they actually ride a bull. So they are maybe a little different bulldozer, maybe the ancient form of a bulldozer.
Definitely. Do you want to talk a little bit about Varuna and drawing that to Neptune?
Yeah, we kind of skipped over Varuna or Neptune because again, it's a little more fuzzy energy there. Again, I associate Ketu with Varuna and with Neptune. And Varuna, is the god, was actually a sky god originally. Uh-huh. And he wore, interestingly, a cloak of stars. So he had this cloak of stars around him. And he was also considered, let me see here, I have it. He was not only the lord of sacred waters, but he was also a mystical healer. Mm-hmm. Which is, again, mystical would be a key word for me, for Varuna or Neptune. And he was the god of cosmic medicines, mm-hmm. And also the lord of Maya or illusion. And he later became he was kind of usurped by Indra, or he actually gave his power to Indra, I think probably because he just got tired of running the show. And he became the god of the waters, you're mentioning the lord of the sacred waters, which is, of course, analogous to Neptune. And even Ketu, as you said, there's this Nina kind of Pisces energy. And of course, in modern Western astrology, Neptune rules the sign of Pisces.
Right.
And finally, Varuna could be connected with spiritual liberation. As we know, as you mentioned, Ketu is the planet of moksha, of spiritual liberation. So to me, there was a really strong fit between Varuna, Neptune, and Ketu, with a lot of the different qualities that these three have. I find, again, I can get a lot of mileage out of looking at Ketu as kind of this Neptunian kind of energy in the chart.
Mm-hmm.
For example, I find with people with Ketu on the ascendant, quite often there can feel this energy of being like a stranger in a strange land.
Mm-hmm.
You know, again, like I said, the bumper sticker, oops, wrong planet. So
I always find myself, with K2 in the ascendant clients going into this whole thing, because I find K2 and the ascendant people always feel like they're being watched.
Interesting.
Because if you understand that Rahu is in the seventh, we tend to do these things as humans, that because our lens on the outside world is a certain way, then we naturally think that other people do the exact same thing. Okay, so K2 in the first house will have obviously Rahu in the seventh. And so that brings this intense focus to other people and watching other people. So the K2 in the first house person is always watching other people and has their focus upon other people. And so the mindset then is that if I'm looking at other people with such scrutiny, other people might be looking at me with that same level of scrutiny.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this discomfort, like you're saying, this stranger in a strange land with K2, because they're not going to they feel more comfortable by themselves, off by themselves. But you put them in public situations or relationship situations, it's uncomfortable. They feel like they're on a stage and they have to perform.
You know, one of the things that they've said to me too in doing this work, because I've been doing astrology for almost 30 years now, is that I get the K2 ascendant people also, they feel like they're not really seen for who they are.
Huh. That's it too. Exactly. Yes.
Like people don't quite get them,
Mm-hmm.
and so they don't feel sometimes understood. And sometimes there can be, with Ketu in the 10th house as well, there can be this feeling of tomorrow's skills for today's world.
Right.
Maybe kind of the odd person out. They don't quite fit in. And so I have Ketu in the 10th, for example, and sometimes Ketu in the 10th will indicate a career in the mystical arts, astrology, metaphysics, mysticism, kind of Ketu-like qualities. And again, there may be some confusion around their dharma, around work, until they get a little older. I don't think I actually started practicing astrology until I was around 32. So in terms of professionally, doing charts and things like that. So again, Ketu to me is just so fascinating, so interesting. And I find Ketu kind of in the 12th house and Neptune there, for example, if the person doesn't get caught up in delusion and illusions or drugs or alcohol, can be very good for moksha. I kind of almost feel like Digbala position for Ketu could be, one of the Digbala positions could be the 12th house. And then that puts Rahu in the 6th, which generally Rahu does well in the Upachayas 3, 6, and 11 in terms of its house placement. So I kind of think of the nodal axis sometimes doing a little better in the 6-12 axis with Ketu in the 12th and Rahu.
I would say one thing those people have to confront, though, is using, I would say, let's see if I can put it into one sentence. I think those people are also going through not just putting your spiritual practice on the mat, but taking it out into the world at large. Because those people can also be prone to being addicted to reclusion.
Yeah.
To the extent that they are now needing to learn in this lifetime, right, well, I've learned how to be separate from the world. I've learned how to be detached, but I haven't yet learned how to be detached in the world and how to be comfortable with, out in the fray of things and dealing with the hustle and bustle and all of that stuff and not getting knocked from my center. I find, Ketu in the 12th house people, they generally tend to work better in their life when they're able to be off by themselves. It gives them that space of being able to kind of, go in, sort things out. But you put them in the fray of things, it's very difficult. So they're having to learn how to deal with that and integrate that experience. When you were talking about Varuna too, I also wanted to say, it's as you were kind of talking about with him wearing this cloak of stars, he's also known for putting the nakshatras in the sky.
Oh,
and yeah, and interestingly enough, too, he, being the god of waters, he was also connected to, to truth and to justice. And there's really a connection between all of those things, because the nakshatras indicate, I find, how we grow a planet and the lessons that we're needing to learn in connection with that planet on a more subtle level. And that, of course, is going to tie in with things like, cosmic law, which is another Neptunian factor. And then the water aspect is the causality that brings all those experiences into our life because of the karmic baggage that we're carrying inside of ourselves. So he really represents all of those things, as would Neptune represent all of those things. And, as would Vishnu institute all those particular experiences that we go through, so that we recognize beneath all these experiences really is just God and my connection with myself and my capacity to be whole and be one and not see everything, because when everything is Vishnu, then nothing can be wrong, really. Which is why I'm never a big fan of the whole malefic, benefic terms of planets. I always really liked Krura, which means cruel, and Somya, which means gentle. Because you can have a cruel planet kicking your butt, but it's the most prosperous thing for you.
Right.
Or you can have, sorry?
Carl Jung said that the birth of consciousness does not occur without pain.
Exactly. And so we tend to lose this mindset that, our challenges are also our prosperity. Sure, we don't like them when they happen, but they're, the most rewarding things that happen in our life. If you only had this state of ease in your life, if we only had like easy things all the time, we'd quite quickly become bored, probably, and a little bit lazy. And so we need those cruel planets. We also need those planets like Uranus and things like that to come in and shake things up a little bit. Because if we don't have it, it's just
I
stuck.
want to mention one of the best books written by a Western astrologer, Howard Sasportas, who's actually from England, I think. He wrote a book called The Gods of Change, Pain, Crisis, and the Transits of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And there's two quotes that I wanted to say because they're very Neptunian. I love these two quotes from Howard's book, where he says, the desire to go beyond the sense of being a separate self and to merge with something greater is one of the great qualities of Neptune.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's very Ketu-like as well.
Yep.
And he went on to say, the urge to lose ourselves, to dissolve or transcend the boundaries of the isolated ego, and to reconnect with the underlying unity of all life is, again, one of the main themes of Neptune. And again, we could see very much connected with Ketu as well. So he's kind of a boundary dissolver, is
definitely
the idea there. And I always think of it, again, kind of a womb-like experience, being in the, as Freud would say, experiencing the oceanic sense of reality.
Definitely,
So we are the wave of the sea, which is our individuality, as Yogananda would say, but we're also dissolved into the sea.
Exactly.
So we acknowledge our wave, we acknowledge our uniqueness, but then we always experience that unity consciousness, which to me, Neptune, Ketu, that's one of their greatest gifts that they give us.
So something that we haven't spoken about yet is the Sedona Vedic Astrology Conference.
Oh yes, we should talk about that. It's about it's November 30th to December the 3rd in Sedona, Arizona, which if you haven't been to Sedona, it's a very outer planet experience.
Definitely.
It has the red rocks, which are very intense, kind of a Marsy energy to them, but also very Uranian. Just the light hitting the rocks, it just is very Uranian here. And then there's the mystical side of Sedona. About every other person here is an astrologer, a psychic, a mystic. The manicurist here reads palms, and the auto mechanic is a psychic, Right. And so everybody's pretty much covered in terms of the mystical arts here. And then finally, it's very transformative here. It's very Plutonian. And you mentioned the connection with
power center. Yeah.
Shiva. One teacher that came from India, she said the red rocks here are Shakti and the white rocks are Shiva. And so it's a marriage of Shiva Shakti energy, of the male female polarity here. And again, it's very, very Ketu like here. And again, even Rahu like, because it's very transformative. It's very hard to live in Sedona, actually. It's great to come here for a conference, but the Native American Indians never lived in Sedona properly. This is where they came to do their sacred ceremonies and their rituals, and they lived on the outskirts of Sedona. Mm-hmm. So getting back to the conference, one of the more famous Vedic astrologers who lived in London for a number of years, Camilla Sutton, will be delivering the keynote address on predictions for 2019. She's also going to be talking about an all-day workshop on the Pachanga. Mm-hmm. And then she'll be doing a 2.5-hour lecture on the Mercury, or the retrograde planets. Actually, Mercury retrograde will be happening during the conference, but we're so used to all these retrograde planets. I think it gives us something to talk about,
Definitely.
And, so one of my dear colleagues, Charlotte Benson, is going to be doing a talk, actually a talk on the outer planets too. And Joni Petrie will be there. Kapil Raj will be coming over. We have a number of other, Jeffrey Armstrong, Sam Jeppy will be there this year. Andrew Foss, who again is originally from the UK. So UK is well represented. I wish you could come. Yeah. So,
maybe next year. I'm hoping next year. That's what I'm looking for.
And people can just go on the website. It's very simple. It's just SedonaVedicAstrology.com. Mm-hmm. And the whole schedule's there, and registration information, accommodations. It's at a beautiful resort called the Poco Diablo Resort, which I've had a number of conferences there, and it's just lovely. It's just like a little Deva Loka. Mm-hmm. And it's very reasonable.
How close is the conference to being full?
Right now, we're about 2/3 full. Mm-hmm. We have about, counting faculty, we have about 140 people coming, and we can accommodate around 200. Right. So we're about 2/3 full. So people want to register, they can now. Early registration prices, which will save you like $50, are good until September 1st. So if people do want to register now, they can. I think, again, it'll be a full house again this year.
Definitely. I'm hoping next year I can make it. Yeah. I keep wanting to. Oops. Maybe that was a omen.
Yeah, I hope so. I really hope it would be great to see you in person.
Definitely. I'd love to do that too. Well, anything in closing you want to share with people?
Well, I have to tell a story. Had Uranus transiting through his 10th house. Mm-hmm. And he may have been going through the Uranus opposition, and he was out of work. He had got his degree in psychology, but he couldn't find really a good, stable job. And so he saw an ad in the paper, and it said, wanted zoo attendant. So he's thinking, this is, unique. I'll go and take a look at this, see what this brings. And the owner of the zoo said, well, it's not really a zoo attendant what we need. What happened is our gorilla died. And it's going to take us several months to get a new gorilla over from Africa. And so what we'd like you to do is get into this gorilla suit and pretend that you're a gorilla. This is a very Uranian story. So he says, why not? I'll try it. So he gets into this gorilla suit and he goes out, and the kids are just loving it. The gorilla is out, everybody can see the gorilla, and he's dancing around, and he's thinking to himself, maybe if I do a really good job, they'll decide to hire me full time. So he's dancing around, and he sees a rope with a tire on the end of it. And he jumps on this tire, and he starts swinging higher and higher, back and forth. And the kids are just clapping. Everybody's loving it. But what happens is the rope snaps, and he goes flying off, and he lands right in the lion's den.
Oh, my God.
He looks up, and he sees this lion, this huge lion, and he starts screaming, help, help, somebody help me. and the lion lunges at him and says, "You better shut up or you're going to get us both fired." Anyway, it's only the San Francisco Zoo. So
Right, exactly.
I embellished a little bit the last part.
Right.
Okay.
That's a great story.
So I'll close with that. A little humor.
Definitely. Well, thanks for coming on, Dennis. I'd love to have you on again sometime soon.
Great.
We generally tend to do it 2-3 times a year.
Yeah,
it's always a lot of fun.
Yeah. All right, Michael. Appreciate it.
Wonderful connecting with you. Take care until next time.
Okay.
Bye now.